singing in your heads. You may not, I knew this hymn, but you may not. But, I'm paid to know that stuff. This is the one with the lyrics given you. Sorry. So the lyrics have been given you.
Come ye disconsolate, where'er you languish, come to the mercy seat, fervently kneel. Here bring your wounded hearts, here turn your anguish. Earth has no sorrow, heaven cannot heal. Joy of the desolate, light of the straying, hope of the penitent, fadeless and pure. Here speaks the Comforter, tenderly saying, earth has no sorrow, heaven cannot cure. Here see the bread of life, see waters flowing forth from the throne of God, pure from above. Come to the feast of love, come ever knowing, earth has no sorrow, heaven cannot Come ye disconsolate, where'er you languish, come to the mercy seat, fervently kneel. Here bring your wounded hearts, here turn your anguish. Earth has no sorrow, heaven cannot heal. Come ye disconsolate, and you shall be healed.
The Gospel reading this morning is from Matthew's Gospel, from the 11th chapter. It's in two parts, verses 16 and 19, and then 25 to 30. The Bible reading roster will kick into gear next week. This week you get me. Jesus said, "But to what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, 'We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn.' For John came, neither eating nor drinking, and they say, 'He has a demon.' The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds." At that time Jesus said, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. All praise and glory be to his name now and forevermore. Amen. For whom is the gospel really good news? The gospel is addressed as good news to everyone, but not everyone hears it as such. Not everyone recognises it as good news. Today's reading from Matthew is in two parts. The first part is verses 16 to 19, and there we find Jesus expressing his frustration with the people of his generation who refused to receive the good news he'd come to proclaim and to embody. And they refused regardless of the way in which that good news was expressed. The good news had been expressed through John the Baptist, who came as an ascetic, not eating and drinking. He has a demon, they said. Jesus came and he ate and drank with sinners and tax collectors and other outcasts. Look at him, they said, a glutton and a wine bibber, as it says in the King James Version. Nothing made them happy. They were like, Jesus said, children playing some sort of game. And one group sang, "We play wedding music for you and you won't dance." To which the other group on the other side of the road answers, "We played funeral music for you and you won't cry." People could not or would not hear the gospel as good news, or at least they would not or could not hear it as good news for them. The rich and the privileged of Jesus' time, the religious leaders, the influential, they would not or could not recognize the gospel, the good news embodied in Jesus. In the second part, verses 25 to 30, Jesus celebrated that though those who thought of themselves as wise or intelligent had failed to see or understand, had failed to hear the good news in Jesus' message, or to see the good news embodied in Jesus' life, in his very person, the infants, the children, had recognised and received the revelation of God embodied in Jesus of Nazareth. Now, Jesus is speaking metaphorically here. It's not just babies and children he's talking about. No, when he uses that word infants, he was referring to the littlest ones, the weak, the vulnerable, the powerless. All those whom the powerful and privileged looked down upon, all those who were dismissed as unimportant, the nobodies, the nothings. They were the ones who recognised who Jesus was. They saw what was being revealed to them in and through Jesus, and they received the gospel as good news because it was good news for them. It was good news addressed to them. After all, they were those who were weary and heavy laden, and to them Jesus offered rest. Those verses, verse 28 through to 30 at the end of the 11th chapter of Matthew, are surely many people's favourite verses from the New Testament. Come to me, all ye who labour and are heavy laden. Those are words of promise, they're words of hope. And through the centuries, many, many people have heard those words as good news. So it's worth unpacking them and looking at them. And the first thing to notice is that those words are an invitation. Jesus was inviting people to come to him, although the invitation is expressed in the imperative voice, which means it's a rather urgent invitation, more like a demand, a command even. Come to me, Jesus says. He's not saying, come to me, please, if you feel like it. Come to me, for heaven's sake, stop bearing that burden, stop being weighed down. Come to me. Now, of course, every invitation, even an urgent one, demands a response. It's the invitation that makes the response possible. Without an invitation, there's no response. The invitation is an act of grace, but a response is required nonetheless. The invitation comes from Jesus, come to me, and we can choose to come or not to come. The invitation is extended to the weary, to the ones weighed down with heavy burdens. In Jesus' context, when he spoke these words, he was talking about the poorest and the most marginalised, because they bore lots of burdens. They bore economic burdens, the burden of poverty and the heavy, heavy burden of cruel taxation that was imposed upon them by the empire. Not only those economic and social burdens, they also bore the burden imposed upon them by the religious authorities. In another place, Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees, says, you tie up a burden and put it on people's backs, a burden they can never bear, they can never carry. The religious authorities demanded of these, the poorest, most vulnerable, that they do this, that they do that they do something else if they were to be righteous, if they were to be included in the community of faith. But the things demanded were things that these people could not do. Things beyond them, impossible for them. To them, Jesus says, come. Come and find rest. Come and enjoy at last the Sabbath time that God has always intended for all of creation, not just those rich enough to be able to afford to take time off. Come and find relief. But surely beyond Jesus' immediate context, these words of Jesus have come to address all people who are weary. All people who are weary because they carry heavy burdens, all kinds of heavy burdens. The burden of sorrow and grief, the the burden of shame and self-hatred, the burden of guilt or of despair and hopelessness, the burden of a lack of meaning and purpose in life. To all who feel the weight of a burden that is wearing them out, Jesus says, come. Come to me, and I will give you rest. But not ease. You see, something is still asked, because immediately after promising to give rest, immediately after telling people that he will take away their burden, Jesus immediately starts talking about the need to take upon themselves a yoke. Take my yoke upon you, Jesus says, and learn from me. Be my disciple. Learn how to live and to love as I have lived and loved. Yes, Jesus sets us free. He sets us free from a burden, but he also sets us free for something else. We usually think of freedom in terms of being free from something, don't we? Free from limitations, free from restrictions, free from rules and regulations, free from responsibilities. But let me use the illustration of retirement to talk about how there's a better way of understanding freedom. When a person retires, they certainly become free from all of the restrictions and requirements and responsibilities that go with being a person who has a job or who works. Don't have to get up in the morning and go to work anymore. It's fantastic. It's great. But if that's all it is, surely the point of retirement is that you are free from some things in order to become free for other things. And anybody I know who is happy in their retirement has not become less busy than they were when they worked. They're still busy doing all the things they always wanted to do but never had time to do when they worked. Retirement has made them free for that which is fulfilling and enriching. And it's that freedom for which can make retirement such a wonderful part of a person's life. And I think Jesus is talking about freedom here in the same way. We are freed from a burden that weighs us down, but we are free for taking upon ourselves the yoke that Jesus has for us to take upon ourselves. Come, says Jesus, and take my yoke. Be my disciple. Learn to live, to love as I have lived and loved. Jesus describes himself as a gentle, kind, and compassionate teacher who has seen how we staggered under the burden of the load that we were carrying. But there is still a burden to be borne. We've spent the last 3 weeks focusing upon Jesus' mission discourse in the 9th and 10th chapters of Matthew, in which Jesus describes to his disciples just how tough and dangerous and difficult the task to which he was calling them would be. It's not going to be easy, he said. Yet here he describes that burden as being light, and the yoke he asks those who come to bear as being easy. Is this a contradiction? Well, let's begin with yokes. Everybody knows what a yoke is. It's a wooden and steel structure placed across the back of a beast so that the beast can pull a load or bear a burden. A poorly made yoke is a very uncomfortable, painful, restricting thing for a beast to carry. But a well-made yoke that fits the beast is an easy yoke. And the yoke that Jesus invites us to take upon ourselves is an easy yoke because it fits well. It fits well because it's custom made for us. Jesus calls us to be what we were created to be. And the load that we bear is easy because it's a load that doesn't weigh us down, but rather a load that liberates and heals us. The load is the load of hope and truth and love and peace and justice that we're called to bear for the sake of the world and to embody in our daily lives. There is any number of things that people choose to weigh them down. There are any number of things that people allow to weigh down their lives. The burden of greed, the never-ending pursuit of ever more things, the burden of selfishness that disregards the needs of others, the burden of pride that preens itself and constantly seeks the applause and approval of others. Then there's the burden of guilt, the burden of shame, the feeling that I'm not good enough, and so on. And these burdens weigh us down and wear us out. But the load that Jesus asks us to carry brings and gives life, even when the load takes the form of a cross. Here's the paradox that lies at the heart of our faith. Out of death comes life, and to live you have to die. If you are carrying a burden this morning, are you? Are you carrying a burden this morning? Are you weary? Are you weary from carrying a load which does nothing but exhaust you? Lay it down and let it go and come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus and find forgiveness. Come to Jesus and find healing. Come to Jesus and find hope for a future, a new beginning. For if you are heavy laden, if you are weary from the burden that you're carrying, then the gospel is good news for you. It's good news for the weary. It's good news for the heavy laden. It's good news for those of us who long for rest, for relief, who cannot bear the burden any longer, who are staggering beneath its load. Come to Jesus. Come to me, says Jesus. Come to me, and I will give you rest. Let's take a moment of silence. I'm going to listen to some music, and this time the lyric is on the screen.
Your labor is not in vain. Though the
And so let